Hi, this is Jamie from jamieedwards.com again, and today I want to talk to you about how you can be more democratic about how you go about making decisions with respect to software architecture. Now, for purposes of this video, when I talk about software architecture, I'm going to be talking about the tools, technologies, and frameworks that you might use to build different software products. So, when I first started out in my career, I've talked about this in my software development journey playlist or videos on YouTube. I was given an opportunity really early in my career to be a lead of a team, and I was promoted to be an architect at like 23 years old, which I talked about in some of my earlier videos was way too early for me, and it went to my head pretty quickly. But when it comes to software architecture, I learned just from being around other architects at the first company I worked for that some companies and some teams and some organizational structures can really look at software architects as sort of like the know-it-alls, or the people who have been doing it the longest, that they should maybe have the most respect and that they're going to make the best decisions about the software. Now, personally, while I think having more experience in the market and having worked on multiple products and maybe with multiple languages is going to give someone more experience, and there's a good chance that they may have things they can think about when it comes to technology selection and software architecture that maybe someone who's more junior might not. It's really a trap that I think you don't want to fall into, to look at software architects or leads on software projects as the person to make those decisions. And again, talking about learned behavior, that first company I worked for, there were some people who had been there, let's say, I think had been there 8 to 10 years at that time, that I really looked up to. I was brand new to the industry, and I'd get in meetings with these people and I would notice that when they would start to talk about various aspects of the technology we were using, the different languages we were using, how we were going about testing, they sounded really authoritative. They really sounded like they knew a lot about what they were talking about. And being totally new, it was kind of intimidating, and it really made me feel like, wow, I'm nowhere near where these guys are, so I better just let them make most of the decisions. However, I found as I progressed through my career that when I'm on a team that's set up like that, and there are people that are sort of looked up to as the leaders or the architects that make all the decisions, it really misses out on the possibility for people who could be newer but could have really creative and different ways to go about selecting technology and going about solving a problem from being able to be used on the project and really to benefit everyone. If you've been developing software for a while, 5 to 10 plus years like I have, chances are you've seen a technology out there that looked really cool and exciting and you've wanted to use it. And in some companies that are set up like I'm talking about, you, depending on the position you're in at that company, may or may not have the ability to actually use that technology. So what I want to share with you today is some different strategies and tips you can use, maybe some just insights you can think about that I've learned that might help you when you're on your next software project or on your current one, use the people on your team better and really get a chance actually to use different technologies in the middle of projects and maybe start doing things that you've looked forward to quicker. So going back to that original opportunity I had to be a software architect at a very young age, because I was given that opportunity and I felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, and you can go back and watch my video I did a couple days ago on that, I was worried about what other people thought about me. I didn't really realize it consciously at the time, but I was really feeling out of my league somewhat when the team I was on, all of a sudden I was above, at least on the organizational chart, some people that had been there for like 10 years. And they would pitch things to me or say that they didn't like some aspect of the technologies I picked or the way I was writing my code. And I would often get defensive. And I think it was just a way for me to try to protect this opportunity I'd been given. And as my career kind of moved on, and at that same company, I found that actually, about half of my team really liked me, and they really liked a lot of the technology decisions I made, and they were inspired by me, and we got to have really good trusting relationships. And so I sort of allowed them to make more decisions about the technology and have more input. And some of the other folks on my team, about the other half of the team, really distrusted me a lot. And they basically poo-pooed or put down all of my decisions as time went on, and just kind of found any opportunity to really complain or almost sabotage the project. And I learned, and I've shared this again, going back to my software development journey videos, I learned a lot more later in my career, probably after the first decade, how important relationships were. And I was able to kind of look back, hindsight's always 20/20, at how I behaved at such a young age, and realized I probably could have had a much more successful project and team members that were more bought into my ideas if I would have learned to allow them to kind of complain and shoot holes in essentially some of the architectural decisions I'd made without taking it personally. So after that first decade of my career, and I had worked at 3 or 4 different companies as a product developer. I was a software architect, but I was basically working for companies that built software products, and I was an employee of those companies. As I've talked about in other videos on my channel, I moved to Austin, Texas a little over a decade ago, and I got an opportunity to move into consulting. And one of the first things that I started to learn when I got into consulting was when we would be asked by another company to, as consultants, go in and help them build a product, or maybe refactor their product, or re-platform it. Maybe originally it was written on Java and we were going to move it to C# or Ruby or something like that, for reasons that there was technical things that they maybe wanted to do with the product that they couldn't do with the prior platform. I learned very quickly that it was really important as a consultant not to just consider what I thought was the coolest technology, or what I wanted to work on, or what I understood the best, or what my team was even bought into, but I had to think more about the client's team. I had to think about, as a consultant, and remember, I worked for a consulting agency at that time. We would often go into a company, several of us as consultants, to help a team, and they would have, let's say, 3 to 10 developers on a team, or more, depending on the size of the project. And we as consultants, there might be maybe 3 of us or something like that. And most of us consultants at that point were already a decade at least into our career, and we had significantly more experience, and we were kind of looked up to as experts. And so I think often we would have to be very careful that we wouldn't fall into making decisions about the frameworks we were going to use, maybe the coding patterns and practices, how we use source control, any aspect really of the software project. We'd have to be very careful that we didn't select things that all of us as consultants were very familiar and basically bought into without considering the client's team. And so I got a lot of experience over the next, following 10 years in all the years that I worked for that consulting agency, going to client after client after client after client, and being challenged with figuring out, when I go into a client and their manager maybe, or their director or VP who hired us, who's paying us to be there, they want us to achieve some business goal or do something with the software, and we might be comfortable, or most comfortable, using let's say a certain Node.js framework or something like that, but the client's people don't. I made some serious mistakes on a few projects, and I know some of my other colleagues have gotten into this situation too, where we put a framework in place. We thought we had it documented, we thought that the client was okay with it, but when it really got down to it, the people on that project weren't really that interested in growing in their career. I know that sounds crazy, but especially some government, for example, clients of ours, they tend to be a little bit slower in adopting new technology. And so sometimes we would go in and put in a new framework, or we'd replatform something. And when we left the project, even if the project was successful and that it was delivered and we got paid and the client was happy, the manager, let's say, was happy, who hired us or who was paying us, the people who worked there and had to then maintain the solution weren't really so happy about it. And it took them a lot longer to come up to speed than maybe we would have expected and anticipated. So again, as that decade in consulting that I just kind of am coming out of now completed, I got a lot of practice with getting much better at getting a feel for what are the true skills and what's the true culture like at that company when I made a technology decision. So the first thing that I think, whether you're a consultant or you're a software development, you probably need to consider and get good at if you're going to make technology decisions that aren't just good decisions for you, but that are good decisions for everybody, is really to not have that sort of elitist, I'm a lead, I'm a consultant, I'm an architect persona or attitude with people, and instead let them know and treat them like they're equals with you. This can be hard, especially if you're working with people that maybe there is a big gap in their skills and yours in a particular technology. Maybe you're quite a bit ahead of them with using something. But the first step kind of to this is really just to let them know, and this is really something that just comes out of relationship building, and I try to establish this really right when I come in the door, in the first week on a consulting engagement, or if you're a product developer, let's say you're kicking off a new project, you join a team or you start a team, just saying to people, either one-on-one or in a meeting, better to do it one-on-one, hey, I just want you to know you may have worked with other software architects before or other leads before, and they made all the technology decisions. And I do have a lot of experience, but I'm actually going to look to you to help me make a lot of these decisions. I want you to know that anytime you have an idea for something you want to do that I maybe haven't thought of, it's totally cool. In fact, I want you to take the time to get a hold of me. Let's sit down, or let's look at your computer, or let's review it on Slack and try to figure out if we can include that technology. There's a couple reasons why this is really great if you can establish this up front. First of all, I've worked on teams sometimes where one member, I don't find out until the project's almost over, thought, the whole project, they were like, well, I really thought we should be using, framework X from the very beginning. And they never said anything about it. And, I kind of looked at it like, well, if you wanted to, why didn't you speak up? But that's also, I think, and this is just my opinion, somewhat of an elitist attitude. If you're going to lead a team and you're going to be, inspiring people and leading them, then it's kind of silly to just look at it like, well, the burden's on you to, tell me if something is a good idea or you want to do something different. The burden is on them, but if you can clear the floor with letting them know that you actually are inviting that, that's going to be making it much more likely that they're going to feel comfortable enough, especially if they don't know you very well, to come to you with an idea for a new framework or technology or software development process, maybe step that they want to do and they're really passionate about. So keeping all of that in mind, let me give you a couple tips here. Now, remember, the goal for this, and this is a shorter video, but the goal for this is really just to try to think a little bit more about how you can be more democratic with software architecture decisions. And again, my broad brush term of software architecture is really, it may not be the by the book definition, but it's any of the tools, technologies, or processes that you use to deliver your software. So the first thing is, if you are a lead on a project, to leave yourself extra time. Do not allow the business or your manager, or if you're a consultant, your client, to expect you to be 100% billable on producing output yourself. Even if you're a great coder, even if you consider yourself really fast with whatever technology you're using, I would recommend to try to pick at least 40% of the overhead of the time that you'd normally spend coding, that's reserved for you to work with your team. The reason why this is so important is, earlier in my career, before I got into consulting, some of the companies that I worked for and the teams I was on that were the most successful were teams that really, I was able to establish that. And I spent more of my time supporting the team than I did coding. And I wasn't, an armchair architect, you might have heard, or architecture astronaut, one of these people who's sort of way up in the clouds and they've got all these ideas, but they don't really do any work. I mean, I was sitting there coding along with people all the time. But the amount of time that I was on the hook to actually produce deliverables was quite a bit less than other people on my team, because it was my responsibility, and I looked at it like this, not just to produce things and not just to make good architectural decisions, but to allow the whole team to make architectural decisions. And there's no way that you're going to be able to do that when pressure starts building, or scope of the project changes, or things start to go over deadlines that people expected, if you're already fully allocated. So think about doing that. If you're following Scrum or Kanban or any kind of planning approach for software development, and you're doing any kind of asset allocation or any kind of basically capacity planning, like how much time does each person have on your sprint or to finish certain tasks, make sure, if you're a lead or if you're working underneath a lead and you want to share this video with them and help them maybe be a more effective lead, make sure that that lead always leaves some time so they can really be there for their team. So the second thing I'd like to recommend, and this is something I've just learned the hard way myself after doing it wrong many times in probably the first 12 to 15 years of my career. I really just didn't learn this until I started to just try it differently. Nobody actually told me this, is if you come up with a pattern that you want to introduce to the team that's different, and there's already code written, or there's already software technology assets, let's say it's DevOps and you're using an automated deployment or infrastructure as code, sort of a framework or technology, and you've already got a lot of assets built. They're already working. You've heard the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, if you think up a new pattern, it's tempting, and I used to do this all the time, to just introduce the new pattern into some code you're very familiar with and show it to the team and convince everyone, hey, I think this is a good idea. What do you think? Give everybody an opportunity to kind of shoot holes in it, come up with their ideas. And if everybody comes to agreement, move forward on it. And then ask everybody else, hey, can you go into your code and change it to follow this pattern? Rather, I think and I don't care if you're a lead or you're somebody who's not a lead, because remember, this is about democratic software architecture. The thought is, no matter how junior a person is, anybody should be able to make software architecture decisions and recommendations and change things. Well, I think whoever that person is that's going to initiate that change, they should be responsible for making that change to all the existing code. Here's a couple reasons why. First of all is, many times as software architects or leads or juniors, whatever level you're at in your career, we will read a blog post, or we'll watch some videos, or we'll read some documentation, or look at an open source project and see a new pattern or see a new technology and learn enough about it that we're excited about it. And we think about the code maybe that we've already written or the assets we already have, and we sort of feel like we've got a handle on it. And we think, okay, this will totally save us time, or this is a better way of coding for a variety of reasons. There's many reasons people make architectural changes, right? But so we'll do that, and we'll feel like once I've kind of gotten buy-in from everybody on the team, that they also are as excited about it as we are, and that they're going to actually prioritize making that pattern change over the work that they're already on the hook for. And that's rarely the case. More often, people are already busy. They're already under, certain deadlines for getting work done. And hopefully, depending on how truly agile of your software development process you have, hopefully it's flexible enough that there's some overhead time available for people to adapt to changes and things like this. But regardless, it's much better, I think, if you, as the initiator of the change, make the change to all the code yourself, because you're going to actually then prove out any holes in that technology that maybe you didn't identify when you were just looking at it, by trying to truly apply it everywhere. The other thing is, you're going to get a chance to look at other people who have written code similar to maybe the part that you worked on, but that might be different, might introduce different changes. And that's going to give you an opportunity to sit with that person or pair with that person and actually work out with them. Hey, remember this pattern we talked about, and we all got in a room, or we all maybe discussed it, over Slack, and we decided we were going to make this change. Well, when I went in to apply this to, let's say your code in this section, I found this situation that was different than anywhere else. And I want to try to figure out with you, what's the best way to do this? Doing it that way is better than just brute force doing it yourself and not involving that person, because they may come back and kind of, depending on their maturity level and what kind of relationship they have with you, look at it like, wow, Jamie just went in and rewrote all my code, and the way he did it, I would have done it totally differently. And then they're just pissed, and they're kind of like, I don't ever want to touch that code again. And code ownership is a big topic. There's people that think it's good to own code. There's people that think it's not good to own code. I won't go into this on that or on this video. But the point of this is just that if you take ownership for a change that you initiate by introducing a new technology, you really need to somewhat treat it as, I'm sort of like the lead or the architect over this change that I'm introducing. And part of introducing that change is you taking responsibility for making sure it gets done everywhere, and also for involving everyone when you go in to make a change to their code, especially if you find something that's a little bit unique or different. So the other thing I want to talk about is just to encourage you, and I've seen teams that do really well at this and not so well at this, to have a wiki. Everybody's familiar with Wikipedia. People use it every day. It's one of the most popular sites on the internet. And chances are you've been on a software project where you've had a wiki at some point. Now, in my opinion, there are some really good wiki platforms out there. In other words, if you're going to use a wiki to, let's say, document your software architecture patterns, there's so many different wikis out there. There's ones, written in C#, there's ones written in Ruby. Microsoft SharePoint has a wiki. Jira, I believe, has a wiki module. And there's a whole bunch of different trade-offs, but, the benefit of wikis to me, more so than just being a place where you can capture ideas, that's better than like a Word document or a PDF or Google Docs or something like that. The benefit to a wiki, in my opinion, is the ability to do wiki gardening. And what this really is let's say you write a topic, here's how we're going to handle, let's say, accessing the database, or, if you're not using a database, whatever your data storage technology is. Maybe it's, Hadoop or something like that, or a, MongoDB or something. If you write up a topic, let's say at the beginning of the project or kind of early on, that just has a quick couple code snippets and explains, here's how we're going to do, storage access or data access, chances are, as the project progresses, and if you're trying to do democratic software architecture like I'm talking to you about, there's going to be new things introduced to that topic. And at some point, it's going to get so long that nobody is going to read it. And so wiki gardening is really going through a long topic and figuring out, okay, this long topic that we've written about some aspect of our software architecture, how can we break it up into some smaller, newer articles and sort of link those together so that if somebody's reading this, they're not overwhelmed and they can get to things and sort of digest them in bite-sized pieces. Well, some wiki technologies, they require you to create, a new article off the first one. You have to create a new wiki page for the child article. You have to title it, save it. Then you have to go back to your original article and, find the link and put it in the right spot and move all your content. And it's really a pain in the ass. Other technologies, it's really simple. You just put the name of the link, if you're using, let's say, Markdown or something like that in your wiki, and you save it, and as soon as you click that link, you can just go to the child page, paste your content in there, and you're done. So I would just encourage you, to use a wiki, but if you're going to, especially for this kind of an architectural approach where you're letting everybody evolve the architecture, make sure you find a wiki technology that makes it super fast and very low friction for people to garden the wiki. Otherwise, I've found if it's not, people just stop using it. They abandon it as soon as it gets frustrating or they don't want to deal with it. Now, again, you as a lead, or you as someone who's leading a change, you need to probably spend some time helping make sure people are following up with gardening the wiki. That's something also that I found. I actually don't mind documentation. I've written a lot of it over my career. Some people hate it, but just whatever you can do to get people to feel comfortable that, hey, if you come up with a new pattern, let's talk about it, let's do it, and let's document it at least at a high level, rather than just throwing the code in and only making the change in their area and then expecting everybody to make the change with no documentation. That's going to have a much higher success rate or chance that people are going to actually pick it up. So going back to my prior point, once you've applied that pattern change to all the existing code, then really you can expect people to actually, when they're writing new code, follow this new pattern or use this new technology or use this new process, because they've got a ton of examples of it in the existing code. And they also don't have, half the code did it the old way and half the code does it the new way. Now, one thing you may be thinking when you hear me talk about this is, well, Jamie, let's say I'm using an MVC framework and I want to introduce view models. Depending on the technology you're using, this might sound like Greek to you, but any kind of pattern that you want to introduce or you want to change in your code, you might be looking at it as, wow, that's a pretty overwhelming change for me to make. I don't think I could make that all to all the code. Well, then I would say to you, it's probably a good idea to consider not introducing it, because some of the worst code bases I've ever seen in my career have been where you can just look at the code and you can look at the architecture and you can tell that like 5 different people all decided to go in different directions and had ideas on different patterns, but they never got it applied to the whole product. And now it just looks like Frankenstein. And I know if you're out there and you've seen a project like that, you know what I'm talking about. So it all just comes back to being consistent about making architecture changes. And I don't care who it is, if it's somebody who's brand new to the team, they've only got a year of experience, they come up with a great idea and convince the team, even if it's going to take them longer, let that person go through the exercise of actually applying that architectural change. So the last thing I'll talk to you about is really that, when you're on a software project and you're trying to do democratic software architecture like this, as I was talking about before, when crunch time happens or you get close to the end of a deliverable or the end of a sprint and people are under a lot of pressure, it can be really easy for people to just completely forget about what I'm talking to you about. In other words, completely forget that there's even an opportunity to introduce new patterns and new technologies. And I think just like, if you've ever done a Scrum project before, there's supposed to be a thing that happens at the end of the Scrum, and it depends on the team you're on. And I won't split hairs about whether you're following Scrum by the book or not. It really doesn't matter to me. But a lot of teams at the end of each sprint, they'll have a sprint retrospective meeting, and this is really supposed to be a meeting where the team gets together and they talk about, hey, what did well? Where did we win on this project? And what are some areas where we maybe need to improve, or maybe even some things that we do regularly that we're just going to stop doing because they're not providing value. Well, I would recommend to you that on any project you're on, especially one where you want to go about more democratic software architectural changes, that you have a rhythm or a scheduled meeting or checkpoint. And this can be over Slack, this could be over lunch, this could be a brown bag, that, however you want to do it, where the team purposely gets together with the intent of talking about technology changes and architecture changes that they want to make. When people don't do this, it often never happens, or you'll have 1 or 2 individuals that will sort of do it when they feel like it. And then you don't really create a culture where people feel like it's inclusive and everybody's invited to really collaborate. So if you're going to have a democratic sort of an architectural culture on your team, coming up with a time that everybody expects, okay, on Tuesday, let's say at noon or at 2:00 in the afternoon, we're always going to spend an hour together and we're just going to clear the floor and let everybody talk about different architectural changes that they want to make. I think is just a great way to make sure that you don't just think about including everybody in the software architecture, but that it actually gets done. So if you like this video today, please share it with other people, especially maybe software development leads or architects, or maybe people who are earlier in their career that haven't gotten a chance to influence the architecture yet. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can click the little bell icon to get notified when new videos are available. I'm also available on many podcast platforms. You can subscribe there, and you can like me on Facebook. So until next time, thanks.